Hello and welcome to Asian Newsweek. I'm Yvonne Yong. For the next half hour, I'll bring you the top stories in the region and go beyond the headlines for a deeper look at what's happening in Asia. Well, let's begin in India, where rescue efforts are being hampered by heavy rain in the southern state of Kerala. Around 200 people are missing and more than 180 have died in landslides in the south of the country. Well, our correspondent Meghna Bali is in Kerala. She's filed this update.
This devastated car gives you a sense of the absolute havoc that landslides and flooding have caused in this little village in the state of Kerala in southern India. You see huge boulders. Now, this street used to be a village with schools and resorts and people's houses, and now it's been totally razed to the ground. And that's because of torrential rain that fell on Monday night. This is the first village those landslides hit, and they decimated dozens of villages after that. Some have been swept away up to 90 kilometres away from this area. Now, rescue efforts have been hampered by incessant rains like these. There have been entire bridges that have collapsed. The armies had to come in and rebuild those temporary bridges, and it's just caused absolute devastation. The death toll sits at over 250 at this moment. There are hundreds missing. Thousands of people have been rescued, but the scale of this tragedy is yet unknown. And local authorities say there are entire villages still stuck under mud they haven't even been able to get to. And this could well become one of the worst disasters this state has ever seen.
Well, the aftermath of deadly Typhoon Gaemi is still being felt across Asia. In China, state media reports at least 23 people were killed as flooding and landslides struck in the south and northeast. Beijing has announced a relief fund of the equivalent of nearly 110 million Australian dollars. Meanwhile, clean-up efforts in Taiwan have continued, with streets in the southern city of Kaohsiung underwater. The effects of the typhoon have also been felt at sea, with rough waters leaving dozens of sailors stranded off Taiwan's coast and causing an oil spill in Manila Bay. Authorities are drawing on lessons learned from last year's MT Princess Empress oil spill to contain the damage.
If you remember, we have the biggest oil spill last year in February. That is the sinking of the MT Princess Empress in Mindoro. That was carrying 900,000 liters of industrial fuel oil. This one is carrying about 1.5 million liters of industrial fuel oil. So this is carrying more. But one thing is this happened in shallower water, like about 30 meters. The one last year happened like in about 400 meters. And this one happened within Manila Bay, a major industrial and economic center of the country. However, because of its shallow location, authorities and private salvage company was able to seal, the cargo tanks.
In North Korea, the effects of Typhoon Gaemi were also felt, with floods destroying more than 4,000 homes near the border with China. State media has released photos of leader Kim Jong Un inspecting floodwaters from his black SUV. Military aircraft, as well as Navy and government boats, were mobilised to evacuate isolated residents. To the Olympics now, where we've seen some incredible performances, many from Asian athletes. Let's find out more from sports journalist Raj Kumar, who is in Singapore. Now, Raj, what have been some of the highlights for you so far?
Well, I think the games started on a high, especially in the men's gymnastics final, when the team event, when we saw the Japanese, the Chinese and the Americans fighting it out for the medals. And at the end, we saw the Japanese prevailing, with the Chinese settling for silver, the United States taking the bronze. So that was the stage that was set. After the men's team final, we went on to the all-around finals, and that's when we saw the Daiki Hashimoto, the defending champion from Japan. He was the clear favorite. But lo and behold, it was his fellow countryman, the 20-year-old Shinosuke Oka, making his Olympic debut. He rose to the occasion when Hashimoto was sort of struggling in his performances, and Oka went on to clinch the gold medal for Japan. The Chinese, Zhang Boheng, settling for the silver medal. Great start for the Japanese. Another main highlight, Yvonne, was in table tennis, the mixed doubles, when we saw the North Koreans trying to fight for the gold medal against the Chinese. They finished, unfortunately, in second place, and then the South Koreans taking the bronze medal. But in all of that, there was this historic photo that was taken by the South Koreans. It was a Wi-Fi. It was a group photo of the athletes from both the Korean nations coming together, and despite their economic differences, cultural and political tension, it was great to see this photo of the athletes all coming together. I mean, the last time we ever saw a unified Korean team was probably at the 2018 Winter Olympics. So this photo has been trending worldwide for the last couple of days. Another quick mention of a highlight, still on the Koreans, is in shooting. We saw in the women's 10-meter air rifle final, Bao Jin took the goal, and then in the women's 10-meter air pistol final, it was also goal again for the Koreans, with Oh Yi-jin taking the gold and Kim Ye-ji taking the silver. The bronze medal went to India's Manu Baker, also being the first Indian woman ever to win a medal in shooting at the Olympic Games.
Well, we'll definitely be looking out for all those athletes. We also have a sport that is debuting at this Olympics, which features some pretty good competitors from this region.
That's right. We're talking about the sport of breakdancing. After more than 40 years since breakdancing appeared, and it's finally in the Olympic Games. And I think all eyes will be on the 40-year-old Ayumi Fukushima. I mean, she's a ex-kindergarten teacher. She first started breakdancing at the age of 21, and now 19 years later, she gets to, live out her dream of competing in the Olympic Games. She is a trailblazer for the women, and for the girls, they call the female breakdancers as B-girls. Let's see what 40-year-old Ayumi can actually deliver in Paris 2024.
Can't wait to see that. And well done to her for breaking for this many years and getting to the Olympics. Raj, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate those highlights.
No worries.
Well, let's take a look at what's making headlines. Protesters have clashed with police in Bangladesh as demonstrations over job quota reforms continue. Students in several cities, including the capital Dhaka, are demanding justice for those killed in recent violence. Reports say more than 150 people died during unrest after a police crackdown. The European Union has condemned the use of excessive force against protesters and has delayed talks with the government on a new cooperation agreement. Dozens of staff at the Singapore office of TikTok's parent company ByteDance have been hospitalised for food poisoning. Officials say at least 130 people developed symptoms of gastroenteritis. It's suspected the outbreak is linked to a canteen in the building. Chinese-owned ByteDance says it's investigating the matter. Free money? Well, that'd be nice. In Thailand, citizens can now sign up for free digital currency as part of a stimulus package to boost the economy. Those eligible can receive 10,000 baht. That's around 430 Australian dollars. The plan was one of the ruling party's campaign promises and comes at a cost of 21 billion Australian dollars. More than 3 years since the military overthrew the civilian government of Myanmar, millions of people have been driven from their homes. Turmoil has gripped the country. This week, the military again extended the state of emergency order by another 6 months as the armed revolt deepens.
Rampant inflation, soaring food prices and energy shortages. Myanmar's economy continues to plunge under the economic mismanagement of the military. Former advisor to Aung San Suu Kyi, Australian economist Sean Turnell says the country's economy could get worse.
One of the things that's been happening recently is that the regime has begun to turn on some of its erstwhile supporters, particularly within the business community. Some of the crony enterprises that were always very tightly aligned to the military, now they're coming under the hammer of the military as it gets more and more desperate.
The local currency has fallen almost 70% against the US dollar since 2021. Energy prices have risen and there are longer power outages. And most days, locals form long lines outside the banks. It's not just on the economic front that the military is facing challenges. Last week, a rebel group seized control of the regional military headquarters of Lashio, near the border with China. A video published on local media also shows the People's Defence Force being welcomed by locals as they do a victory lap through the streets of Mogok, a town famous for Myanmar rubies. The resistance movement has been gaining force, but news editor Simon Sangre says the mood is tense as people wait to see if the Myanmar military will launch a counter-offensive.
The last 2 weeks has been quite significant in terms of the Myanmar, the armed resistance movement, particularly, the town. There's a lot of people or international community know the Mugo, the Ruby City. So the Ruby City is located within the Mandalay region, which is the central Myanmar. So that has never been, fallen at the hand of ethnic armed group.
Meanwhile, on the sidelines of ASEAN, Foreign Minister Penny Wong called for peace.
So our message is we will continue to work with ASEAN and others to do what we can to find stability. But fundamentally, my message from Australia to the regime is this is not sustainable for you or for your people.
But the military doesn't look to be loosening their grip.
I think we won't see elections for a long time. The security system on the ground is extremely dire for the people of Myanmar, but also for the military regime that are ruling over them. Essentially, they've lost control over a lot of the country. And the idea that they could hold anything like credible elections is just fanciful.
And with the military again extending the state of emergency by 6 months, any meaningful vote appears a long way off. Libby Hogan, ABC News.
This week has seen some high-profile meetings in Asia. On Monday, ministers from Australia, India, Japan and the United States, a group known as the Quad, met in Tokyo. On the agenda were talks on maritime security, technology and cybersecurity. Well, earlier that day, Australia promised almost $20 million to set up a new centre to help Asia-Pacific nations develop plans for undersea cables. Well, after the Quad meeting, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited Manila and then Singapore. He announced almost 770 million Australian dollars in support for the Philippines. The military funding is aimed at supporting the country's Coast Guard amid tensions with Beijing in the South China Sea. Meanwhile, Australia's Foreign Minister made a rare visit to the demilitarised zone between North and South Korea. Penny Wong has criticised Pyongyang for its nuclear weapons program and supplying Russia with arms as it continues its invasion of Ukraine. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jejets has the details.
Crossing one of the world's most dangerous fault lines.
Visiting Panmunjom today is a potent reminder of how ever-present the threat and risk is for people living in the Republic of Korea.
Penny Wong briefly setting foot in a country which has promised to annihilate its southern neighbour.
South and north. So actually where you're standing is North Korea.
The backdrop is grim. North Korea is ramping up its nuclear weapons testing and its threats to South Korea and the US. Pyongyang has also signed a security agreement with Russia while sending munitions to Moscow to help it wage war against Ukraine.
This is destabilising. This is risky for the world.
We know that North Korea is providing weapons directly to Russia. We also know that Russia has significant space, missile, nuclear expertise that North Korea is interested in.
South Korea has a military alliance with the US, but facing a darkening horizon, it's now building closer strategic and defence ties with other democracies like Australia.
We share our grave concerns about DPRK's escalatory actions.
You can see why South Korea is searching for new partners. Not only is North Korea developing more formidable weaponry, but Pyongyang, Moscow and Beijing all seem increasingly intent on upending the regional order and forcing the US out of North Asia. On top of that, Seoul's very worried about a transactional Donald Trump possibly returning to the White House. Stephen Jejets, ABC News, Canberra.
The terrorist group behind the Bali bombings says it's disbanded. Jemaah Islamiah became the most feared terror threat in Southeast Asia after the 2002 attack in Bali's nightclub district that left 202 people dead. Well, 16 senior members of the group have pledged their commitment to renounce violence and abide by Indonesian law. But there still could be threats of lone wolf attacks. Well, to tell us more, Max Walden from the Asia Pacific newsroom joins me in the studio. Now, Max, remind us again of who Jemaah Islamiah were and what they stood for.
Jemaah Islamiah were a Indonesian Salafi jihadi militant group. That is a terror group that was interested in overthrowing Indonesia's democratically elected government and installing an Islamic state. They're also a group that were prepared to use violence towards that aim, and particularly also against Western targets, most famously, of course, in the case of the Bali bombings, but they also bombed the Australian embassy in Jakarta in 2004.
So why now? Why have they announced that they've disbanded, and can they be believed?
Yes, experts tell me that they can be believed. A lot has changed since the Bali bombings in 2002. So over the last sort of 22 years, after the Bali bombings, Detachment 88 or Densus 88 was established within the Indonesian National Police, which is an elite counter-terror unit that was backed by both the US and Australia. And they've had a lot of success via both what was described as hard and soft methods. So they've used mass arrests. In some cases, they're accused of human rights abuses and extrajudicial killings of terror suspects, but also very effective countering violent extremism. So getting alleged terrorists or extremists on side. Of course, Indonesia is a Muslim majority country, so appealing to members through peaceful and sort of de-radicalisation methods as well.
But with Jemaah Islamiah gone now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the terror threat doesn't exist in Indonesia and the region.
That's right. Jemaah Islamiah has handed in their weapons. They've given lists of people in their militant wing to Densus 88 in the Indonesian police. However, of course, experts do say that there's still IS, Islamic State affiliated groups active in the region. Nevertheless, though, they say that compared to, say, a decade ago, the overall extremist threat in Southeast Asia is much lower because, again, as we see in the Middle East, ISIS is considerably weakened. And again, this sort of law enforcement presence and the effectiveness, particularly of the Indonesian authorities, has actually really, taken a lot of the strength out of Islamic State affiliated groups in the region. So interestingly, the terror threat is much, much lower than certainly in 2002, but even a decade ago.
Really interesting, Max. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Staying in Indonesia, where the president has visited the country's new capital, Nusantara, on Borneo Island. Joko Widodo rode a motorbike across a newly constructed bridge that connects the capital to a nearby port. It's hoped the new transport link will speed up the delivery of building materials, so Nusantara can be officially inaugurated in August. There's a long way to go. The project has been plagued by delays due to bad weather and the fact that the location is so remote. It could actually take decades to complete, not to mention it's costing some $45 billion. Jokowi proposed the move from the overcrowded capital, Jakarta, in 2019. British boy band The 1975 are being sued by the organisers of a Malaysian music festival. Last year, Malaysian authorities canned the three-day event after videos on social media showed the band's frontman kissing the bass player. Well, the lead singer's actions were a protest against the country's anti-gay laws. Organisers are now seeking millions of dollars in damages over the cancellation. Thailand's historic decision to legalise same-sex marriage has been celebrated by equality advocates across Southeast Asia. And for members of the LGBTQI community, it's one of many reasons to move there.
What would it take to move overseas? A better job? Cheaper housing? What about a wedding? Research from Singapore pride group Pink Dot found only 1 in 4 LGBTQ+ people plan to build a life in Singapore. And of those considering a move, 4 in 10 are motivated by marriage or the ability to start a family, compared to just 7% of their non-queer counterparts. So, where are they going? Thailand has long been seen as a queer paradise in a region where homosexuality is at best tolerated and at worst a death sentence. Indonesian scientist and trans woman Nia Ibrahim Rose moved here a couple of years ago, and she hasn't looked back.
Here they are very free for showing your expression to anyone. I met some also Indonesian, and they don't need to hide their identity, and they can express their love to each other.
In June, queer Asians got another reason to move to Thailand.
Thailand's parliament has approved a law giving equal marriage rights to same-sex couples.
Kyoko Shodlad was part of Thailand's Parliamentary Committee on Marriage Equality. They argued that Thailand's tourism industry has long benefited from inclusive policies, but Kyoko expects the marriage laws will encourage new migrants, not just queer travellers.
I've seen this a lot on the internet, but people are saying, oh, I'm definitely going to Thailand to get married. Thailand is where I want to move because back home in my country, I'm a criminal.
Thailand is only the third jurisdiction in Asia to legalise same-sex marriage, after Taiwan in 2019 and Nepal in 2023. But over the border in Malaysia, homosexuality remains illegal, and many seriously consider moving to Thailand.
Despite being an activist here in Malaysia and wanting to do the work, there are times where I think about wanting to leave because it does get tiring. But, at the same time, you have to think about what that means. You are leaving people behind. It's a very sad reality that I think a lot of queer people have to think about.
Many people in Southeast Asia can't or don't want to leave their homes. So they hope Thailand's marriage laws will bolster the fight for rights in their country.
I hope that Thailand will open the doors for other countries to actually understand how important our lives are, how important these laws are.
It sends a message to them that this is the way that the world is headed, and whether you like it or not, one day you're going to have to accept that.
Hong Kong is a changed city. 5 years after a record number of anti-government demonstrators engulfed its streets, freedoms have been curtailed and the city has lost scores of skilled workers. East Asia correspondent Kathleen Calderwood talks to economist Vera Yuen to find out more about the current state of Hong Kong.
Hi Vera, hi, I'm Kathleen. Nice to see you. How's it going?
Yeah, it's great.
That's good, that's good.
Are you good with the weather in Hong Kong?
It's pretty warm, yeah.
Yeah, it's warm. Let's get a drink.
Okay.
I want a watermelon juice.
Perfect. I'll have the same, please.
Great.
Thank you.
Economist Vera Yuen is showing me how things have changed.
Thank you.
Yeah, so let's go for a walk.
Yeah.
This is the busiest area in Kowloon in Hong Kong. So you can see a lot of people walking. And this is the major junction. Nowadays, the landlord said it's harder to find people to rent the place. So I think this area is better. But for some area, we can see empty shops on the street.
A lifelong Hong Konger, Vera still describes her home as one of the most capitalist cities in the world. But she has no doubt it's struggling.
I see more brick and mortar shops closing. And there have been fewer people on the street. These whole buildings, 3 floors are all for leasing. So they still couldn't find a tenant. Tourists from foreign countries, they're not very interested in coming to Hong Kong. It could be due to those travel warnings issued by their own government. And also it's expensive.
But Vera is more worried about other aspects of the economy and the reputational damage the city has incurred since 2019.
If you look at the stock market, it's not really doing well. And then our investment is like 85% of that in 2018, which means the investors are really leaving for that part, and we have not recovered that part.
Do you think that the economy will ever get back to pre-2019 levels?
It will gradually. I think Hong Kong's economic growth slows down. From my experience, I think Westerners overestimate the risk. They are pretty scared of what happened in Hong Kong. They think that I cannot live normally and I should fear for what I do, like for every step in my life, and that's not really true.
Women in Indonesia are picking up martial arts and there's rising demand for female-only classes. While many are signing up as a form of self-protection, it's also a way to keep fit and manage stress. Rafa Atala reports.
After surviving 11 years in an abusive marriage, Rani Miranti joined a fight club. She trains in mixed martial arts with people of all ages and genders.
Itu lebih penting banget refleks untuk mempertahankan diri. Dan yang kedua adalah stress release. Stress release saya adalah boxing karena saya pernah ada di physical abuse yang saya tidak bisa melawan. Nah sekarang akhirnya saya punya pelampiasan itu dan saya punya skillnya.
Nearly 300,000 incidents of gender-based violence were recorded in Indonesia last year. A rising number of women are learning self-defense, and this Muay Thai teacher is overwhelmed by demand for her classes.
Soalnya lagi banyak banget orang yang nyari guru Muay Thai, guru private Muay Thai, karena kan ada yang orang enggan sama coach laki-laki kan ya, jadi dia lebih leluasa kalau sama coach perempuan.
Back in 2022, Indonesia's parliament approved a landmark bill on sexual violence to help bring justice for victim survivors. That year saw a spike in recorded crimes, but since then, there's been a decline in numbers. It's not necessarily a positive sign. Authorities say underreporting is rampant.
Untuk kasus kekerasan seksual, masih banyak masyarakat kita yang menganggap itu sebagai sesuatu yang aib, memalukan untuk yang perempuannya. Karena itu juga banyak keluarga yang kemudian memutuskan sudah. Kalau bisa kita handle, nggak perlu kita kasih tahu seluruh dunia anak kita pernah mengalami kekerasan seksual.
And while cultural change is slow, martial arts is one way some women are finding empowerment. Rafa Atala, ABC News.
UNESCO's World Heritage List has grown with more sites in Asia now. Beijing's Central Axis, which includes former imperial palaces, and the ByteDance Jaran Desert in China's northwest are now recognised. Well, Malaysia's Nia Caves on the west coast of Borneo has made the list, and Japan's Sado Island gold mines are a controversial addition. For more than 400 years, gold and silver was mined there, but during World War II, it became a site of forced labour for Korean workers. Midway through a long-haul flight, sometimes there's no better meal than a cup of steaming hot instant noodles. But if you're flying with Korean Air, that's off the menu. Concerns about the increase in turbulence and the number of passengers getting burnt has led to the airline banning the delicious snack. Instead, a sandwich, corn dog or hot pocket might have to be your mid-flight hunger buster. Well, that is the program. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.